From here to the stars. I am your host, Stephen Euin Cobb. Join us in Luxembourg, December 2 to 5, 2024, for a visionary week of the human future in space among the stars at the IRG's first European Interstellar Symposium. Find out more at irg.space. Our guest today is Dr. Martha Lenio. Dr. Lenio earned her doctorate in photovoltaic engineering. She was mission commander of the NASA-funded Hawaii Space Exploration Analog and Simulation. She was also one of 23 women shortlisted in 2017 for the Canadian Space Agency for its Astronaut program. She is lead solar consultant at Mars Green Consulting and technical manager at High Latitude Energy Consulting. Doctor, you are scheduled to speak on a panel at the 8th Symposium of the Interstellar Research Group, which will be held this summer, July 10 to 13, 2023, at McGill University in Montreal, Canada. The panel is billed as a Sagan meeting after the style of panel which Carl Sagan developed. The topic will be, how would you select a crew for the first interstellar mission? Since some in our audience will not be at the symposium, what are some of the points that you want to emphasize?
Hi, thanks, Stephen. I think some of the points I found to be really important from having done the analog mission in Hawaii is just like the importance of like the mental resiliency and the teamwork and trust that you build within your crews. So that's going to be, I think that's going to be a really big focus for such a long duration, possibly, likely one-way mission, is that mental resilience component and how you choose a crew for that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mental resilience is a term I've heard occasionally, but how would you define that?
I think it's it's a bunch of things. One is a big one is having a sense of humor and not taking yourself too seriously. So being able to like laugh at your mistakes, but also and like build and grow from them. When I was in the Mars Dome for the Hawaii Space Exploration and Analog Simulation, I kind of felt I was also like upping my mom skills. I'm not actually a parent, but I felt I was like kind of the crew mom at some points and just like being able to take care of people around you.
Mm-hmm.
Another is recognizing when you're burnt out or need some time for yourself to recharge and take a break, and having that trust that you can turn to your crewmates and be like, hey, I'm struggling. I need you to help me out at this point. I need to take a break. I can't be on this EVA. I just need to take a nap or listen to music or do some yoga or have some self-care time, and trust that you have good people around you that will create that space for you and give you that support net that you need when you need that that recovery time. So those are a few things that I would look at building a crew, is that you have that capacity to care for the people around you, and you have that capacity to that self-awareness of when you also need help and how your actions are impacting those around you.
Okay. I mentioned that in 2014, you were mission commander of the NASA-funded Hawaii Space Exploration Analog and Simulation. What was that all about, and how did you become mission commander?
That was really interesting. I was kind of like, I've always been interested in being an astronaut my life and all my life, and I also want to, recognize that's kind of a long shot. So I want to make sure that I do something positive with my career as well. So I've been focusing on photovoltaics and clean energy. But at that point, I'd been living in Silicon Valley for 4 years and was looking at making that career change to try and, make sure I've still got that astronaut desire on the horizon. And the opportunity came up to apply to be on one of the crews for the high seas missions. And the goal of those missions is there was a 4-month mission, an 8-month mission, and then a 1-year mission that followed ours. And the goal really was looking at how you pick a crew and support a crew for these long duration isolated space missions, so that people would go crazy and kill each other. Those are the words of our principal investigator, Dr. Kim Vinstead. So that's the goal of those studies. And I hadn't really been too interested in the psychological impacts or aspects of space exploration before that. Like, you know, I thought a lot more about the physical and technical requirements. So like, again, I was doing engineering, I'm fit, I was like on the soccer team, I like doing hiking and camping and stuff. But I hadn't really thought of the mental challenges of it until we did that mission. So it was really interesting and to see that actually, yeah, this is a really key component of one of these long duration missions. That's why NASA's interested in running, you know, funding these kind of studies, is to see how that will play out, perhaps for a real mission.
And how would you describe the mission that you participated in? If the physics of it and the maybe the training and things like that, how would you describe that to someone who had no knowledge of it at all?
Yeah, I thought it was actually really quite well done. The crew selection took even like almost a whole year between the time we applied. And there was like kind of like, you know, you put in a cover letter and a resume and a research proposal for what kind of research you would do in the dome. And then there were online aptitude tests. And then there was like Skype interviews and group Skype interviews. And the final selection process was they took all the finalists for the crew members on a 6-day backpacking trip with the National Outdoor Leadership School in Wyoming. And that was just to see, you know, how do they mesh as a group? What kind of leadership and followership skills do they have? And how do they do not showering for a week, not having access to email for a week, you know, cooking for each other, and, you know, who's putting up the tent, taking down the tent, who's displaying all these kind of like, you know, initiatives and, you know, team care and self-care things. And at that point I was like, you know, I've applied for this and I know I'm a normal person, but I'm also like, I don't really want to be locked up in a dome for 8 months with a bunch of crazy people, because you do get some extreme personalities sometimes in the space industry of like, you know, people really keen on going to space. But they did, I think that the process really screened in some really good people, and there were really lots of really highly talented, motivated, funny people. And I was like, oh, like you guys are really just normal, highly talented, you know, fun people to be around like myself. And I would totally be cool being in a dome with you guys for 8 months. So it just having that really, at that point, but before the trip, I was like, okay, well, this is great, but we'll see how it goes. And after the trip, that camping trip, I was like, I could definitely see myself in the dome with these people for 8 months. And one of the interesting things on that trip, like it was with the National Outdoor Leadership School. And at that point, I didn't feel that I actually had very good leadership qualities or any leadership qualities at all. But one of the activities, like, and it was very easy camping too. I've done a lot of camping and stuff in my life. So we were maybe doing like 4 or 6 miles a day. It wasn't too intense, the hiking. But then we'd wrap up around 2 in the afternoon, do a debrief on how the day went, and do some kind of leadership training workshop thing together out on the land. And one of those was like talking about there's actually different types of leaders. Everyone actually has the capacity to be a leader. It's just your leadership style may be different. And my leadership style is leading from behind. So you could kind of tell that on the days where I was meant to be, you know, the leader. I kind of like, and I was one of the leaders. Everyone had turns being the leader for the hike on a day. On like my day of being the leader, I kind of like singled out the people who had not had camping experience, and I gave them ownership of the map for the day. And I was like, you're gonna have to lead someday on this trip. So you're gonna hold on to the map and you're gonna learn how to read the map and orient so that when it's your day, we're not gonna get lost. So I was kind of coaching the newbies on that. And the day I was leading, like one of the other things is I wouldn't typically lead from the front on a hiking trip. I would be at the back to make sure that no one's getting left behind. But one of the other fellows on the crew, Neil, he's a former Army medical officer, I guess, and he kept going to the back. And I realized, like Neil is automatically taking the caboose. We called it the caboose position to make sure no one's left behind. So then I was like, okay, I'll stick around closer to the front and make sure the person with the map is supported and doing all right. So that was kind of like my day. So anyways, I learned that I actually have a lead from behind leadership style. And that with this crew, this team of people who are highly motivated, highly talented, you don't actually want someone who's a micromanager telling you what to do all the time. You just want to be like, go do your best and I'll help out if you need help. But just, you're going to do your jobs way better. So I was like, actually, maybe in this situation, I am the right person for this leadership job. Like, you do want a fairly hands-off leader because everyone is just so good at what they do. I just need to correct course. Like, I would just need to correct course once in a while. And so I thought maybe with this group of people in this kind of remote setting, like with these goals, maybe I'm the right person. And we did get like one like quick survey at the end where we had some input as to who got onto the crew too. It was like, is there anyone in this group you couldn't handle being in the dome with for 8 months? Like, do you vote someone off the island? And who would you like to be as the commander? And that was actually the first time in my life where I actually voted for myself to lead something. Like, before that trip, I didn't believe that I had the right leadership qualities for being a leader. And after that, I was like, okay, maybe I do. It's in this situation, it's actually right. So it was I got a lot of confidence and knowledge, self-knowledge out of that trip. So it was really a really great experience.
Okay. Do you believe that there were any surprises, say, for NASA out of that trip, or those types of trips?
Well, the interesting thing, NASA does those trips too. So for us, it was actually really, it was a really cool trip because we did a 6-day trip, but NASA actually had their own astronaut class starting a Knowles backpacking trip at the same time. So the first day we were actually all together, and their mentor was Sunita Williams, who, you know, is a NASA astronaut who's been to space multiple times. And some of the people in that class were like Jessica Meyer and Christina Cook and Victor, whose last name I can't remember, who's going to be going around the moon soon, and Anne McLean. And it's just like, you're just like Star Trek, starstruck. So like, again, until that point, we thought, oh, NASA's not really taking, well, whatever, this is like a fake mission to fake Mars. It's not very serious. But it's like, they're giving us the same training that they give to their actual astronauts that they send to space. So that was, again, that was like a really like huge, like, oh, like what we're doing is important. NASA really is interested in the psychological results of this experiment. So it kind of was like, I think it helped us to take it more seriously as well. It's like, this is how serious NASA's taking it. We're getting the same training as astronauts. Okay. So it was really cool.
Okay. In 2017, you were one of 23 women shortlisted by the Canadian Space Agency for its astronaut program. Mm-hmm. What were you doing when you first learned that you had made the shortlist, and what was your reaction?
I think that was fairly soon after, like within a year, I think after we got out of the dome, maybe about a year after, that's when Canada opened up the astronaut selection process. So at that time, I'd started up my own consulting company. I'd started up Mars Green Consulting and was working on that full time. And so I worked on that application, the first written application, over the summer, and it's pretty involved. It was like a 60-page application of all the stuff you've done. But also, like, after getting out of the dome, you've been inside for 8 months and haven't felt the sun on your skin or the wind on your skin. So when I got out, I didn't want to be indoors at all for like almost a year. So I actually had a job as an assistant tour director for Tour d'Afrique, which is a like cross-continent cycling company. So I remember part of that astronaut application being on the cycling trip from Montreal, or from Quebec City to New Orleans, and we had a stopover in New York for a few days. And I remember like writing the like online government entrance exam online from like a library in New York. So and completing my medical forms on the road on a cycling trip. And then when we had like actual in-person medical examinations, I was staying with my sister in Edmonton. So I was kind of like self-employed, traveling around, doing some solar consulting, doing some cycling, and just physically also, like, I knew I'm in this process, and there are physical aspects to being an astronaut too. So you need to be able to swim 400 meters in under 10 minutes. You need to be able to swim underwater for 15 meters. You need to tread water, with your head and shoulders above water for 10 minutes. So there's like just like physical requirements too. So I remember doing like a lot of like, physical training in preparation for the just in the event that I made it through to the final stages of the competition.
So the selection process was actually a series of tests, so to speak, rather than simply one test.
No, it was a whole battery. So it was like, 5,000 people apply to be an astronaut. And that first is like a written application. And it's quite involved. And then I also had like about 8 different people like review my application and help me edit my application and try to make it like the best possible. So I asked for help from friends and family too. It's like, I need to make this the best possible. And then it just, it runs through a computer out. 5,000 applications, they run it through a computer and hopefully you make it out the other side. So it is important to, I feel almost like of all of the steps, that was probably the hardest step. Once you made it through that, I think they whittled it down to, I don't know, maybe it's only a couple hundred. And then you had like a medical screening and the online entrance exams to the like federal public service exam or something. And if you pass that, I think maybe like between 120 to 250 of us got actual physical medical exams. And then if you pass that, then you were one of the final like 72 who went to in-person 3-day in-person physical and mental boot camp to see, so the whole process takes about a year, similar to high seas. So I think high seas was a good training for that as well.
Okay. You earned your doctorate in photovoltaic engineering at the University of New South Wales in Australia. Many viewers may be familiar with how photovoltaics work, but for those that are not, if you would describe the basics of a solar cell.
Sure. So switch tactics now. Okay. So like everyone, I think most people know the very basics. A solar panel is, it's a panel, you put it on your roof, you sit in the sun, it just generates electricity from the sun and you're able to use that. At the more kind of like semiconductor physics level, silicon is a semiconductor. So that means, if you can think back to like your high school chemistry and you learn about like the atom and valence levels and the different levels of like, your electrons, we learn about the valence level, the outer shell of the electron shell of the atom. There's actually kind of another level beyond that called the conduction band. So when you get electrons excited, you bump them out of the valence level into the conduction band, and then they can move around and conduct electricity. So for a metal, those bands overlap. So that's why it's very easy to conduct electricity in a metal. And in a insulator, those bands are so far apart, the electron can never make that jump. But in a semiconductor, it's kind of like the sweet spot where if you have like the right amount of energy, you bounce that electron from the atom up into the conduction band and it can move them around. So silicon's one of those materials, and it just happens that the wavelength of light, that kind of like peak wavelength of light from the sun is around, I don't know, somewhere between around 600 nanometers or something. And that's about the band gap between the valence and the conduction band and silicon. So it's kind of like we get like this peak amount of sun in this band gap area that's perfect for silicon. And it makes it a great material for making solar cells out of. And, silicon is, it's you get it from sand, it's a non-toxic material. You need to purify it, but basically like that's where the voltage in the solar panel comes from. And then the electricity is when the sun shines on it, gets those electrons excited, and they have the perfect amount of energy to kind of like jump up into that conduction band and move around. So that's kind of like a very basic level, but it's just like nice that there's a material that has this perfect perfect material property for capturing sunlight, and it's non-toxic and abundant across the planet. So yeah.
Okay. Where I live, I pay roughly 13 cents per kilowatt hour for electricity from the grid. But I understand that in Maine, the price is around 30 cents per kilowatt hour. Yep. More than double. How does the local price of electricity impact the viability of solar panels?
Certainly, like the more expensive your electricity, the more viable they are. And I work largely in Canada's north right now. So like just for comparison, in Iqaluit, Nunavut, where I live, the base price for electricity is, I think, 68 cents a kilowatt hour.
Wow.
So yeah,
Okay.
so going solar makes a lot of sense, right?
Mhm.
And the cost for putting in solar is different place. Like everything in the north is expensive. So I think we're looking at large scale solar installations in Canada's north. If you can hit kind of solar installation cost where your price for green energy would be about 40 cents a kilowatt or 44 cents a kilowatt, like that makes sense. It starts to make sense. Like you should do that project up there. It's a no-brainer. And that's achievable. I think that's achievable. Um, in the south, everything's much cheaper. It's like shipping costs are cheaper, like labor costs are cheaper. So you can get much cheaper electricity, like solar installations down south. So in Maine, certainly it would make sure at 30 cents a kilowatt hour, you can definitely make a profit off putting solar panels on your roof there.
Mhm.
Quebec in Canada, it's like where this conference is happening. Your price for electricity, I think, is only 5 or 6 kilowatts, and it's mostly hydro. So it's
Mm.
already fairly clean electricity. So there's not a lot. You also have to think of where is your electricity coming from as well, if it makes sense. If it has high carbon emissions and content, then certainly also it makes sense to go solar. And in Nunavut, like it's 68 cents a kilowatt hour and it's diesel. So there's all sorts of reasons for going towards solar. Even if we only get a lot of sun in the summer or like 6 months a year, it still makes sense just because it's so expensive and it's so dirty. Whereas in Quebec, that's a harder sell because it's hydro, it's cheap.
Mhm.
Do you really need to do that much solar? So those are kind of the considerations that go into if you need to make that switch or not. But yeah.
Okay. The price of solar cells has been falling pretty much every year since the 1950s. New materials, new innovations, new processes have steadily brought the price down. What is your anticipation for the future of solar cell prices, say over the next 5, maybe 10 years?
Like they'll still continue to drop. We like there's different reasons why the price goes down. Sometimes it's like, yeah, the materials cost. Others it's or like we're switching out materials. Like there's a lot of focus on the silver contacts on the front of the solar cell and switching those to like nickel or copper or some other kind of more, cheaper metals. Um, and there was always like when I was doing it, there was a big emphasis on using thinner silicon wafers or thin films. Um, but yeah, one of the things we're running into is like you're getting towards the upper efficiency limit of silicon. Like we've perfected a lot of we've removed a lot of the inefficiencies in the designs. So we run into like, okay, how much more efficient can we make it? And we're still getting there, but I think some of the innovations have to come on the system side now, with the batteries, with the inverters, the other things that support the whole. Because solar doesn't exist in a vacuum. It like you get sun when the sun is shining, but when there's no sun shining, or you get electricity when the sun's shining, but when there's no sun shining, you don't. So you still need other systems around it to give you that 24 hours access to energy. So a lot of the innovations in solar systems are coming in the battery area, and that's going to make a big impact, the energy storage.
Which is my
Yeah.
next question. Battery
Cool.
technology is also crucial for solar cell installations to become viable. What is the current state of battery technology, and what are the changes going on in this area?
Yeah, battery, that's actually the much more interesting, I think, research area. In terms of like the technology at the moment, people are trying like new materials, new designs, and yeah, that's kind of what I know. Those and the supply chains too. So there's some concerns with like access to lithium, different materials and human rights around mining all of the materials that are required for this whole green energy and evolution as well. So different things are being proposed, like having like a blockchain battery passports or something like that, so you can see along the whole supply chain where all the materials came from. That was I'm not sure what that is, but that idea was being floated a few years ago. Battery recycling and materials recycling, like those for both solar and batteries, that's a big deal moving forward. So, with lead acid batteries, we have to make sure that they're getting recycled. With lithium batteries, there's a limited amount of lithium on the planet. So if your battery lasts 15 years, then we have to be able to find a way to recover that lithium, turn it into new batteries and reuse it. So those are some challenges that we're facing with that whole supply chain part. But the technology itself is getting more energy dense, more affordable. The supply chains are getting built out. So that part is exciting, but we have to think of the future as well. So that's a challenge.
How does solar cell installation that feeds into the grid compare with other energy production methods as far as price? How does it compare, say, with coal-fired power plant, for example, or oil or natural gas?
I think globally, solar is the cheapest out of everything now. If you're looking at like doing a new power plant, renewable energy is the way to go now. And certainly, and definitely in some areas, it's cheaper than in others. But when you're looking at new plant, especially in Canada, I know probably a lot of the audience is American perhaps for this, but in Canada, we have a carbon tax. I think, a lot of countries across the world, we're starting to have a carbon tax. There's a real concern that even like natural gas and stuff plants, like you can't get if you're looking at, I think in Canada anyway, there's concern, like they built some like natural gas peaking stations. So it's like actually using renewable energies and storage is cheaper than that now. So all these assets, they're kind of becoming stranded assets because there's just cheaper solutions in the green energy sector. So honestly, I don't understand why even coal power plants are still being built. I think there's just no future, and they're already more expensive in most of the world. Maybe there's some small cases in countries that are growing rapidly where they just need everything, but even you look at China, it's like over half the solar installations happening globally or something are happening in China. Like they're also building out renewable energy as fast as they can. So it's I think it is just the cheapest option for energy anywhere, I think.
Let's see. Do you foresee a day in the future when all electricity in the grid will be a product of solar cells? And if not, what do you think it will be a product of?
It won't. Solar is not 100% of the solution. Like I can already tell you that, and that's because in I look at the north, and if you have a community where the sun doesn't rise above the horizon for 2 or 3 months, I mean, you can't rely on solar because we just don't have the long-term energy storage solution for that. So it will be a combination of solar and wind and hydro. And I think that's a hard thing for utilities built in a traditional sense to wrap their head around, that the future of energy is distributed, and energy generation close to where it's being used will be important, and energy generation from a variety of renewable sources with some backup storage is going to be what we're moving towards. A lot of places have a lot of hydro is a really great renewable resource that there's a lot of it built up across the world. But even then, we're recognizing that new hydro is not great when you have to put up a dam, flood a whole valley. There's a lot of carbon emissions released from that land use change. You can get issues with mercury and stuff in the water. So even new hydro projects are a bit problematic. So I think like wind, solar, and novel energy storage solutions are going to be the way a lot of energy grids are built out.
That was Dr. Martha Lenio. This has been From Here to the Stars, a video series produced by the Interstellar Research Group. The IRG is a nonprofit organization dedicated to thoroughly exploring the science and engineering that can eventually open up the reality of interstellar travel. Join us in Luxembourg, December 2 to 5, 2024, for a visionary week of the human future in space among the stars at the IRG's first European Interstellar Symposium. Find out more at irg.space. I have been your host, Stephen Euin Cobb. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and you can subscribe to our channel for other such videos. On behalf of all of us here at the Interstellar Research Group, I thank you.